What if you woke up one day and read your own obituary? What if the world, having already forgotten all of your intentions, defined you solely by your most dangerous invention? Imagine how it would feel to see yourself painted as a merchant of death, remembered not for the innovation you sought to create, but for the destruction that followed in its wake. Now let's stop right there. That scenario, it may sound extreme, but it's exactly what happened to Alfred Nobel, a man whose legacy could have been erased or forever cursed by the very thing he invented. But here's the twist. Nobel didn't accept the narrative that others wrote for him. Instead, he wrote his own. In the world of invention, it's easy to become obsessed with the pursuit of progress. But the consequences of those inventions, especially when they spiral out of control, can leave us with haunting questions. What happens when the breakthrough you thought would change the world for the better ends up doing the opposite? And what does it take to redeem yourself from a legacy of unintended destruction? Alfred Nobel's story offers a rare glimpse into the mind of a brilliant inventor who faced this very dilemma. In this video, we'll take you through his journey from childhood to his invention of dynamite, through the moral reckoning that followed, and finally, to the creation of a legacy that would endure for centuries, all born from a single, fateful moment of reflection. Nobel didn't just invent explosives. He invented a way to atone for them, forever changing how we think about the consequences of our actions. Welcome to Behind the Legend. In today's video, we're diving into the life of Alfred Nobel, a man whose name is synonymous with both progress and destruction. We'll explore how a brilliant mind, driven by invention and innovation, became haunted by the very thing he created. But more importantly, we'll uncover the incredible transformation that led Nobel to redefine his legacy, turning a dark chapter in history into one of hope, recognition, and global progress. When we think of Alfred Nobel, what often comes to mind is dynamite, the explosive invention that made him rich and famous. But what if I told you that dynamite, in the end, became his greatest moral dilemma? Nobel's invention revolutionized construction, but it also became a powerful weapon of war. In fact, it was through a tragic twist of fate, an accidental obituary, that he was forced to face the full consequences of his creations. This video isn't just about Nobel the inventor, it's about Nobel the man. We'll explore how his upbringing, his struggles with guilt, and a profound personal reckoning reshaped his life's work, turning him from the merchant of death to the founder of one of the world's most prestigious honors, the Nobel Prizes. This is the story of how a single, life-altering reflection led one man to rewrite his legacy, showing us all the power of redemption and transformation. Let's begin. Alfred Bernhard Nobel was born on October 21, 1833, in Stockholm, Sweden, into a family where engineering and invention were more than just professions. They were a way of life. His father, Emmanuel Nobel, was an inventor and engineer, though his ideas rarely brought success. Despite this, Emmanuel instilled in Alfred a deep fascination with mechanics and engineering. In a time when industrialization was just beginning to sweep across Europe, the Nobel household was a crucible of inventive ambition. From a very young age, Alfred's mind was consumed with the pursuit of knowledge. He was a curious child, voracious in his studies, devouring books on chemistry, physics, and technology. In fact, Alfred's education was highly unconventional. Rather than attending formal schooling, his father arranged for private tutors, exposing him to a wide array of disciplines. By his teenage years, Alfred was fluent in several languages and had a solid understanding of chemistry, which would later become the foundation of his work with explosives. Despite his early intellectual brilliance, Nobel faced a strained relationship with his father, who was often absent, struggling with financial difficulties, and deeply disheartened by his lack of commercial success. This rift, combined with the instability of his early years, may have planted the seeds of Nobel's drive for recognition and achievement, but it also exposed him to the harsh reality of failure, a theme that would follow him throughout his life. As a young man, Alfred moved to Paris, where he worked with prominent chemists and scientists, diving deeper into the world of explosives. This period marked the beginning of his lifelong obsession with discovering safer, more efficient methods of handling explosive materials. His experiments would lead him to develop nitroglycerin, an unstable, highly volatile liquid that had immense potential but was also incredibly dangerous. Nobel's early focus on creating practical solutions was undoubtedly driven by his desire to bring stability to an unstable field. Yet, in hindsight, it's clear that he had little foresight about how the power of his creations could spiral out of control. This period of experimentation also reveals an essential aspect of Nobel's psyche, a relentless drive to solve problems. Nobel was not a man of idle thought. He sought to create tangible, useful innovations that would shape the world. But as we will see, this drive would eventually collide with a harsh reality, the immense destructive power that lay within his inventions. Nobel, in his early years, was obsessed with mastering explosives, but he had not yet fully comprehended the moral weight of that mastery. Nobel's fascination with explosives reached its first dangerous crescendo with his work on nitroglycerin. Though he had perfected the process of producing this powerful liquid, its volatility was a constant threat. In fact, nitroglycerin was so unstable that even the slightest disturbance could cause it to detonate. Nobel's pursuit was not just about discovery, but about taming this unpredictable force, striving to make it both manageable and useful. In 1864, a horrific tragedy underscored the extreme dangers of Nobel's experiments. His younger brother Emil was killed in an explosion at their factory in Stockholm. The loss of Emil devastated Nobel, and it is often regarded as a pivotal moment in his life. The explosion itself was a tragic accident, one of many that could have been avoided. Nobel, ever the perfectionist, took full responsibility for the safety measures that had failed. It was this event that haunted him deeply, creating a psychological scar that would shape his future decisions. But even after Emil's death, Nobel's obsession with mastering explosives did not wane. The guilt from his brother's untimely demise lingered like a shadow, but Nobel did not retreat from his path. Instead, he doubled down on his work, determined to find a way to make nitroglycerin safer to handle and use. This unrelenting drive was characteristic of Nobel's personality. While many might have been shattered by such a personal tragedy, Nobel's reaction was to focus even more intensely on solving the problem that had cost him so much. Yet, as his work progressed, the psychological toll of his creation became apparent. The question of whether the risks were worth the reward lingered in the back of his mind, even as he sought to refine his invention. There is a profound internal conflict at play here. Nobel was driven by the belief that solving the problem of handling nitroglycerin would change the world, but the death of his brother weighed heavily on him. Nobel's resilience in continuing his work speaks to a particular type of psychological fortitude, a refusal to be undone by tragedy, but also a profound lack of consideration for the wider implications of his creations. This internal tension between the quest for scientific progress and the personal cost of innovation would follow Nobel throughout his career. The tragedies in his life, particularly Emil's death, seemed to fuel his desire to create a safe solution, but it also obscured his ability to recognize the ethical implications of the weapons he was inadvertently creating. The internal struggle between a desire for control and the recognition of the destructive potential of his work would shape Nobel's path forward. By 1867, Nobel had developed a safer form of nitroglycerin by stabilizing it with diatomaceous earth. This new compound, which he named Dynamite, would go on to revolutionize industries such as construction and mining. But Nobel couldn't have known that his breakthrough would soon be used for something far more destructive than he had ever intended. The ethical dilemma that Nobel faced was not simply about the safety of his invention, but about the eventual consequences of his creation once it left his hands. In 1867, Alfred Nobel finally achieved what he had worked for years to perfect: dynamite. By stabilizing nitroglycerin with diatomaceous earth, he had created a far safer explosive, one that could be controlled and used more reliably. In a world that was rapidly industrializing, dynamite quickly became a game changer. It revolutionized construction, mining, and infrastructure development. Bridges, tunnels, and buildings could now be built more efficiently and at a faster rate than ever before. Nobel's invention promised to unlock human potential, enabling the rapid growth of industries and nations. However, as with many great innovations, the positive applications of dynamite were swiftly overshadowed by its potential for destruction. Within a few short years of its release, the explosive was co-opted for use in warfare. Nobel's creation, intended for peaceful industrial purposes, became a critical tool in military arsenals across the globe. As nations armed themselves with the newfound power of dynamite, Nobel witnessed the unintended consequences of his invention. The very force that could be used to break through mountains and clear land for progress was now used to tear apart human lives in the name of war. The psychological impact of this reality on Nobel must have been profound. His invention, initially seen as a tool for progress and construction, became synonymous with death and destruction. How did he reconcile his brilliant contribution to industrial advancement with the fact that his invention was fueling conflict and war? Nobel's internal conflict at this stage speaks to the moral dilemmas faced by many innovators, the unintended consequences of their work, and the difficulty in foreseeing the ways their creations will be used once they are out in the world. This was a turning point for Nobel. He had always believed in the purity of science, that innovation, when controlled and directed properly, could only lead to progress. But the reality of dynamite's use in warfare forced him to confront a dark truth. His invention was being used in ways that aligned with everything he had hoped to avoid. The Merchant of Death was a title that, despite never being officially conferred upon him, became a part of the narrative that surrounded his name. How could someone who had sought to help humanity now be seen as a benefactor of its destruction? The psychological consequences of this realization were devastating for Nobel. His sense of guilt must have been overwhelming, as he grappled with the fact that he was responsible for an invention that was causing widespread harm. But it was also here, in this moral reckoning, that a shift began to take place in Nobel's mind. It wasn't enough for him to create a tool for progress. He needed to find a way to ensure that his legacy would be defined not by destruction, but by something that could genuinely benefit humanity. This search for redemption would drive Nobel to take an extraordinary step, a step that would not only alter the course of his life, but change the world forever. In 1888, a strange and poignant event shook Alfred Nobel's world to its core. It all began when a premature obituary, mistakenly published in a French newspaper, referred to him as the Merchant of Death. The obituary was printed after Nobel's brother Ludwig died in 1888, and the confusion led to the publication of Alfred's obituary instead. The headline, "The Merchant of Death is Dead," was meant to mourn the death of a man who had accumulated wealth through explosives, but it became the trigger for an intense period of self-reflection for Nobel. For someone like Nobel, who had built his career around the idea of creating life-changing innovations, to be remembered as someone who had caused untold destruction and death would have been devastating. But what makes this event especially powerful is the way it forced him to confront his legacy head-on. The obituary, though unintended, became a mirror that forced him to look at the man he had become, the man he didn't want to be. The psychological impact of this event on Nobel is profound. Here was a man who had spent his life as an inventor, tirelessly seeking to solve problems for the betterment of society. And yet, here was the world, ready to reduce his entire existence to the creation of a tool of mass destruction. The obituary was a shocking reminder of the dissonance between Nobel's intentions and the public's perception of his legacy. It must have felt like a betrayal of everything he had worked for. And for a moment, it seemed like Nobel might indeed be remembered as little more than the inventor of an explosive device that had been used in countless wars and violent conflicts. But rather than allowing the obituary to define him, Nobel chose to act. This moment, the shock of seeing his life reduced to one devastating invention, became a powerful catalyst for change. Nobel's reflection on this event forced him to reevaluate his life's work and the way in which he wanted to be remembered. Rather than retreating into despair or bitterness, he took an active role in shaping his legacy. He made a decision that would forever alter the course of history. He would use his wealth to create something lasting, something that would promote peace, knowledge, and human advancement. In a sense, Nobel's reaction to the Merchant of Death headline was an example of what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. The contrast between the person he thought he was, an inventor working for progress, and the legacy that was being attributed to him was unbearable. To resolve this dissonance, Nobel made a conscious decision to shift his focus. He moved away from his destructive past and worked toward creating a legacy of peace. But more than just correcting the public perception of his work, Nobel took tangible action to ensure that his contribution to the world would be one of positive, enduring change. This shift in Nobel's thinking wasn't just a superficial reaction to a mistaken obituary. It was a profound transformation in his understanding of personal responsibility. He realized that his creations, no matter how innovative, carried moral weight. And in order to create the kind of legacy he wanted, a legacy that would benefit humanity rather than harm it, he needed to take responsibility for both the good and the bad that had come from his inventions. This process of moral reckoning led him to the realization that he could use his wealth to fund the promotion of peace, education, and scientific discovery. And this marked the beginning of the Nobel Prizes. The psychological significance of this transformation is immense. Nobel moved from a place of guilt, uncertainty, and fear of his own legacy to a place of empowerment. His decision to create the Nobel Prizes was not just about alleviating guilt. It was about actively choosing to make a difference, using his life and resources to create something of enduring value. This journey of transformation from merchant of death to a promoter of peace is not just the story of one man. It's a story about how we can all reshape our own legacies, no matter how dark the past may seem. Alfred Nobel's decision to create the Nobel Prizes was a profound act of personal redemption. By leaving the bulk of his fortune to fund awards for those who had contributed to the betterment of humanity in fields such as physics, chemistry, medicine, literature, and peace, Nobel was not just securing his financial legacy. He was ensuring that the ultimate impact of his life would not be measured in destruction, but in the progress of humanity. The idea behind the Nobel Prizes wasn't just about recognizing individual achievements. It was about inspiring future generations to pursue greatness with a sense of moral responsibility and vision for the collective good. Psychologically, Nobel's choice to establish the prizes can be seen as a deeply cathartic act. After years of grappling with guilt and the weight of his creations, he sought a way to channel his immense wealth into something that would counterbalance the destructive power of dynamite. By creating a lasting institution dedicated to recognizing those who advanced knowledge, peace, and human progress, Nobel was actively rewriting the story of his own life. But the act of establishing the prizes wasn't just about writing a will. It was about setting in motion a system that would outlive him and continue to shape the future. Nobel's careful planning ensured that the prizes would not only be awarded on a yearly basis, but would also be funded in perpetuity, meaning they would be sustained long after his death. He applied the same scientific rigor and engineering precision that had characterized his career in explosives to the planning of his legacy. This was a man who, despite all his previous struggles and moral conflicts, had the foresight to build a mechanism that would endure for generations, promoting the very ideals he had come to cherish: peace, knowledge, and progress. Perhaps most poignantly, Nobel's decision to include the Peace Prize speaks volumes about his personal transformation. Though he had once contributed to the tools of war, he now sought to reward those who worked tirelessly to prevent it. It is often said that peace is not simply the absence of conflict, but the active creation of conditions for cooperation, understanding, and goodwill. Nobel's Peace Prize was not just a moral correction of his past actions. It was an expression of his desire to encourage the very opposite of war, a desire to honor those who worked toward healing rather than destruction. In addition to the profound psychological significance of Nobel's act of redemption, there is an important lesson about the role of personal relationships in his transformation. One of the most significant figures in this process was Bertha von Suttner, an Austrian pacifist and author. Suttner, who had written Lay Down Your Arms, became an unofficial counselor to Nobel during the later years of his life. Her influence on Nobel cannot be overstated. It was her ideals of peace and disarmament that helped to reframe his thinking. Nobel's correspondence with Suttner shows how she helped him process his moral conflict and contributed to his decision to fund the Peace Prize. It's not hard to imagine how the conversations between Nobel and Suttner were transformative for him. She was a kind of psychological therapist, guiding him toward understanding his internal turmoil. The relationship between Nobel and Suttner was paradoxical. Even though Nobel had created a technology of war, he also saw the potential for it to end conflicts, just as Suttner envisioned peace. Nobel's statement to her, "Perhaps my factories will put an end to war sooner than your congresses," reveals his conflicted belief in the power of his invention to both destroy and deter. Suttner's influence, however, steered him toward the realization that peace, not destruction, was the ultimate aim. The creation of the Nobel Prizes, then, is not simply a historical fact. It is a profound psychological and emotional journey. It shows us the power of reflection, the courage to confront one's darkest moments, and the transformative potential of turning one's greatest guilt into something that can benefit future generations. Nobel's journey from being defined by destruction to leaving a legacy of peace and knowledge is a powerful example of personal evolution, a reminder that, regardless of our past, we have the power to shape our future. Nobel's story isn't just the tale of one individual's moral transformation. It's a universal lesson in how human beings can reshape their legacies, even in the face of overwhelming guilt and unintended consequences. Alfred Nobel's journey offers insights that transcend the realm of science and invention, touching on the deeper psychological principles of responsibility, self-awareness, and redemption. At the heart of Nobel's transformation is the question of personal responsibility. In the world of invention, it's all too easy to become fixated on the brilliance of one's creations without fully considering the potential consequences. Nobel's initial ignorance of the destructive power of his inventions mirrored the mindset of many of his contemporaries. There was a certain detachment from the moral implications of their work. It wasn't uncommon for 19th century scientists and innovators to separate ethics from invention, assuming that their discoveries would inevitably lead to progress. Take, for example, Thomas Edison, whose role in the development of electricity was essential, but who was at times willing to overlook the dangers of electrocution in his pursuit of innovation. Similarly, many other engineers of the era focused on the scientific breakthroughs without fully confronting how those breakthroughs might be weaponized or misused. Nobel, too, was initially blind to the destructive potential of his own work. But through his experience, we see the importance of developing an ethical framework alongside scientific progress, an awareness that our creations are not just tools of innovation, but also vessels of potential harm. This is where Nobel's story diverges. While many of his contemporaries never truly grappled with the moral weight of their work, Nobel's intense self-reflection forced him to confront his legacy head-on. His guilt over the misuse of dynamite became the catalyst for an extraordinary transformation. He recognized that his wealth, accumulated through the invention of a destructive weapon, could be used to ensure a legacy of peace and human achievement instead. In this sense, Nobel's decision to establish the Nobel Prizes was an acknowledgement of his responsibility, a way to atone for the unintended negative consequences of his inventions, and a way to shape a future that could undo some of the harm he had caused. Nobel's story also reminds us of the power of self-awareness and introspection. It's often in moments of crisis, moments when our mistakes or unintended consequences are laid bare before us, that we have the opportunity to engage in deep self-reflection. Nobel didn't simply accept his legacy as the inventor of a weapon. He saw an opportunity to rewrite his story. Through the accidental obituary, he was forced to confront the reality of how he would be remembered. And in that moment of reflection, he chose to create something that would outlast him, something that would define his name in a far more meaningful way. This is a lesson that all of us can take to heart. We are often defined by the decisions we make and the way we respond to the unintended consequences of those decisions. Nobel's transformation shows us that it is possible, through self-awareness and moral courage, to change our course. We may not all be in a position to create a global institution like the Nobel Prizes, but we all have the power to reshape our legacy, to learn from our mistakes, and to create something of lasting value. Moreover, Nobel's decision to establish the Peace Prize highlights an essential principle in the journey of personal redemption: the idea of atonement through positive action. Rather than merely attempting to erase the harm caused by his inventions, Nobel worked to create something that would bring humanity closer to the ideals of peace and progress. This notion of making amends is not just about seeking forgiveness, but about actively striving to contribute positively to the world. Nobel's legacy reminds us that, no matter what our past mistakes may be, we have the power to transform them into something that serves the greater good. Ultimately, Nobel's story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our own work and the impact it has on the world. Are we, like Nobel, creating things that can be used for both good and ill? Do we fully consider the unintended consequences of our actions, both in our personal lives and in the work we produce? More importantly, when faced with the reality of those consequences, are we willing to take responsibility and transform our legacy into something positive? The Nobel Prizes themselves serve as a reminder of the kind of impact one individual can have on the world, even when that individual has made mistakes or caused harm. Through self-awareness, personal responsibility, and the courage to make amends, Nobel transformed himself from a man whose inventions were associated with war into a man whose name is synonymous with peace and progress. Alfred Nobel's journey is not just a historical tale. It offers valuable lessons that are deeply relevant to our own lives. Nobel's story shows us that even in the face of mistakes, guilt, and unintended consequences, we can all reshape our legacies, transform our lives, and contribute to the greater good. The key takeaway? That transformation starts with self-reflection, ethical responsibility, and a conscious effort to create a meaningful impact, no matter the scale of our actions. Let's break down some actionable strategies inspired by Nobel's path, strategies that can help you reflect on the impact of your own work, address unintended negative consequences, and actively shape a positive legacy. 1. Engage in self-reflection. Nobel was forced into reflection by the startling reality of his obituary, but we don't have to wait for a crisis or a wake-up call to reflect on our lives. Regular introspection is key to understanding how our actions align with our values and goals. Take time to evaluate your decisions, both personal and professional, and ask yourself, what impact are these decisions having on others? Are there unintended consequences that I haven't fully considered? What is the long-term legacy I want to leave behind? A great starting point for this practice is to create a personal reflection journal. Once a week, write about your actions, the motivations behind them, and any potential consequences, good or bad, that may result from them. This simple but powerful habit helps you stay grounded in your values, and it also gives you the chance to course correct if necessary. Number 2, acknowledge and take responsibility for mistakes. Nobel didn't run away from his guilt, he confronted it. He understood that in order to truly transform, he had to own up to the impact of his inventions, not only the good, but the harm they had caused as well. Taking responsibility doesn't mean simply apologizing. It means understanding the ripple effects of your actions and seeking ways to make positive changes in the world. If you've caused harm, whether through an invention, a decision, or a relationship, own up to it. Acknowledge the impact, apologize if necessary, and then take concrete steps toward making things right. This might involve amending a past decision, changing your behavior moving forward, or even contributing resources to an important cause that can help undo the damage. 3. Seek redemption through positive action. Nobel didn't just sit in guilt. He found a way to transform his mistakes into something positive by creating the Nobel Prizes. While not everyone has the resources to set up a global institution, there are still countless ways to make amends through positive action. Whether it's volunteering your time, donating to charity, supporting peace initiatives, or mentoring others, you can turn your focus to fostering positive change. Take a moment to think about how you can contribute to something bigger than yourself. It may be as simple as supporting a cause you're passionate about, or as complex as starting a project or initiative that will leave a lasting impact. Just as Nobel chose to reward those who made meaningful contributions to humanity, you too can make a difference by aligning your actions with the greater good. 4. Embrace ethical considerations in your work. As an inventor, Nobel's journey shows us the importance of considering the ethical ramifications of what we create. Whether you're a scientist, entrepreneur, or even an artist, it's essential to weigh the potential consequences of your work. Ask yourself, could this invention or decision have unintended harmful effects? If so, what steps can I take to mitigate them? Before launching into new projects or making major decisions, take time to reflect on the broader impact of your work. Consider engaging with others, including people who might be impacted by your actions, to understand their perspectives and gather feedback. Taking this holistic, ethical approach will help you create with more awareness and responsibility. Number 5. Seek mentorship and counsel. Just as Nobel benefited from the guidance of Bertha von Suttner, seeking advice and counsel from others can help you process difficult decisions and complex feelings. No one can navigate life's challenges alone, and having mentors, advisors, or trusted friends to talk to can provide crucial insights and emotional support. Consider reaching out to someone you trust, a mentor, therapist, coach, or close friend, to help you work through difficult emotions or decisions. These individuals can help you see blind spots, provide new perspectives, and support you in navigating complex moral or ethical dilemmas. Don't underestimate the power of having someone who can be your sounding board during moments of crisis or reflection. 6. Regularly reassess your legacy. The key to transforming your legacy is to stay connected to your vision and assess it regularly. Nobel's creation of the Nobel Prizes was the result of deep reflection, but it was also the result of consistent, deliberate planning. You too should regularly assess how you're doing in terms of leaving a meaningful mark on the world. At least once a year, sit down and take stock of your progress. Ask yourself, are the choices I'm making aligned with the legacy I want to leave behind? Are there areas where I can improve, both professionally and personally? Reassessing your legacy regularly will help keep you on track and allow you to course correct if necessary. These strategies, self-reflection, responsibility, positive action, ethical consideration, mentorship, and legacy assessment, are all part of the personal transformation process that Nobel experienced. Just as he turned his guilt into a force for good, so too can you learn from your own mistakes and take active steps to create a lasting and positive impact. While the lessons gleaned from Alfred Nobel's life are rich and multifaceted, there are deeper psychological dimensions to his journey that are worth exploring. Nobel was a man of immense scientific genius, yet his life was not without complexity, contradiction, and the weight of responsibility. To truly understand his transformation, we must consider the burden of wealth and genius, the pressures he faced, and the complex interplay between guilt, personal ambition, and altruism. One of the most psychologically significant aspects of Nobel's life was his immense wealth. By the time he established the Nobel Prizes, he had accumulated a fortune estimated at more than $250 million, roughly equivalent to billions today. This wealth, initially acquired through the explosive power of his inventions, brought with it a responsibility that Nobel could not have fully anticipated. The question of how to use such wealth in a meaningful and ethical way must have weighed heavily on his mind, especially considering that he was aware of the destructive power of the inventions that funded his fortune. Wealth itself is a complex psychological burden. In the case of Nobel, it was not just financial wealth, but a form of moral wealth that required him to reconcile the impact of his creations on the world. While many wealthy individuals throughout history have simply used their fortunes for personal gain or self-aggrandizement, Nobel's decision to use his wealth to fund the Nobel Prizes was a radical act of reparation and self-rectification. This decision brings into focus an important psychological insight. Wealth can become a form of existential pressure. The more resources you have at your disposal, the more you are confronted with the question of how to use them ethically. This burden is amplified when one's wealth is derived from a source that causes harm or disruption to society. For Nobel, his wealth was forever tainted by the destructive potential of his invention, but his ultimate choice to establish the Nobel Prizes shows that he understood that with great power comes the opportunity, and perhaps the obligation, to make amends. Alfred Nobel's immense scientific genius is another key factor in his psychological journey. It's important to remember that Nobel was not just a man of intellect, but also a man of extraordinary ambition. From a young age, he was determined to make a mark on the world, to be remembered as someone who had changed history. This drive was amplified by his early exposure to his father's failed inventions, which created a sense of urgency in young Alfred to succeed where his father had not. This pressure to succeed, coupled with Nobel's own perfectionist tendencies, must have created immense internal tension. The pursuit of perfection in any field, whether in invention, science, or any other creative endeavor, often comes at a cost. The cost, in Nobel's case, was his emotional well-being. His relentless drive for success and innovation led him down a path where his creations, such as Dynamite, were born out of a desire to solve problems without fully considering the long-term consequences. Nobel's internal psychological struggle between his desire to create for the betterment of humanity and the inevitable consequences of that creation is something that many high-achieving individuals can relate to. The drive to achieve can often be so consuming that it blinds one to the potential costs. In Nobel's case, his genius and ambition led to a groundbreaking invention, but it also created a moral dilemma that he would wrestle with for the rest of his life. The fact that he was able to transform this tension into a force for good by founding the Nobel Prizes is a testament to his capacity for self-awareness and growth. One of the most striking aspects of Nobel's psychological journey is how he managed to transform his guilt into altruism. Early in his life, Nobel was likely driven by a desire to be recognized as a great inventor and scientist. However, once he realized the deadly potential of his work, guilt began to overshadow his achievements. This guilt, tied to the death of his brother Emil and the widespread use of his inventions in warfare, created a profound moral crisis within him. Yet, rather than allowing this guilt to destroy him or retreat into despair, Nobel used it as a catalyst for positive action. The psychological concept of altruistic guilt is crucial here. Altruistic guilt occurs when someone feels personally responsible for a harm caused by their actions, even if those actions were not intentionally harmful. Nobel's deep sense of responsibility for the destruction caused by his invention is an example of this phenomenon. He didn't simply feel sorry for the unintended harm caused by dynamite. He felt compelled to make things right. This is where Nobel's altruism shines through. Rather than resigning himself to the role of a man cursed by his invention, he sought to use his wealth and influence to do something constructive. By founding the Nobel Prizes, he channeled his guilt into a force for good. This act of transformation, turning guilt into a positive legacy, is one of the most powerful aspects of his psychological journey. It serves as a reminder that, no matter how great our mistakes may be, we have the capacity to redeem ourselves through meaningful and positive action. What Nobel's story ultimately reveals is the complexity of human nature. We are all capable of great achievements, and at times, terrible mistakes. Our greatest strengths can sometimes lead to our most profound weaknesses, and our greatest creations can be both a source of pride and a source of pain. Alfred Nobel's life reminds us that human beings are not defined by their failures or their successes alone. We are defined by our capacity to reflect on our actions, to take responsibility, and to change course when necessary. Nobel's internal journey is not an isolated story of one man. It is a story that resonates with anyone who has ever faced the unintended consequences of their work or struggled with moral dilemmas. It is a story of redemption, of transformation, and of the incredible power of self-awareness and ethical responsibility. In a world where technology and innovation are constantly evolving, Nobel's life is a powerful reminder that our creations, no matter how brilliant, carry with them an ethical responsibility that we must not ignore. The story of Alfred Nobel is ultimately one of profound personal transformation, a journey that illuminates the power of self-reflection, moral responsibility, and the ability to redeem oneself. Nobel's life was marked by extraordinary achievements, but it was also defined by the internal struggle he faced as he came to terms with the unintended consequences of his inventions. Through a combination of guilt, reflection, and a willingness to take action, Nobel redefined his legacy. His creation of the Nobel Prizes is not only a story of philanthropy, but also a testament to the incredible capacity of the human spirit to confront darkness and transform it into something that benefits humanity. Nobel's legacy transcends his inventions and the initial controversy surrounding dynamite. His ability to confront his guilt, his acknowledgement of the ethical responsibility that came with his creations, and his eventual decision to use his wealth for the greater good are powerful lessons in personal growth. Nobel's story teaches us that even when faced with regret and moral conflict, we all have the potential to reshape our future and the legacies we leave behind. This is the true power of Nobel's transformation. He realized that we are not defined by our mistakes, but by how we respond to them. And when we take responsibility for our actions, actively seek to make amends, and reflect on the impact we have on the world, we can create a legacy that is not defined by regret, but by the positive mark we leave on future generations. Nobel's journey is not just an inspiring historical tale. It is a reminder that we, too, can change our narratives, no matter how dark they may seem, and leave behind a legacy that transcends our past mistakes. The lessons from Nobel's life are universal. They speak to anyone who has ever faced a moral dilemma, anyone who has ever struggled with guilt or regret. They show us that we have the power to confront those emotions, to take action, and to transform ourselves in ways that impact the world in profound and positive ways. It is a message of hope, of redemption, and ultimately of the power we all have to leave a meaningful legacy. Now, it's your turn. Nobel's transformation from Merchant of Death to the founder of one of the most prestigious global awards is a powerful reminder that we all have the power to shape our legacy. But shaping our legacy starts with reflection. Here's how you can begin to turn your own moral dilemmas and challenges into opportunities for growth and positive change. Start by taking a closer look at the things you've created, your actions, your work, your projects, and consider the impact they've had, both positive and negative. Write down one creation or decision you've made and identify 3 unforeseen negative impacts it may have had on others. This exercise can help you confront the unintended consequences of your actions and give you the clarity you need to make adjustments going forward. Next, schedule an ethical checkup for yourself. This is a moment, just like Nobel had, where you stop and ask, what is the legacy I'm creating with my work and my actions? It's an opportunity to reassess your direction, address any harm caused, and ensure you're actively building a future that aligns with your values. And here's one more powerful exercise. Try writing your own obituary today. How do you want to be remembered? What do you want your legacy to be? Imagine if you woke up tomorrow and the world already had its view of you, shaped by your actions and creations. What would you want them to say? Write it down and use that as the guiding light for the changes you want to make in your life. By taking these steps, you're doing the crucial work of transforming your narrative, just like Nobel did. You're actively shaping a future where you are remembered not just for the challenges you faced, but for the courage and integrity with which you responded to them. Thank you for joining us today on Behind the Legend. Alfred Nobel's story is one of redemption, transformation, and the incredible power of introspection. We hope that his journey inspires you to reflect on your own actions and create a legacy that you can be proud of. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And remember, the future is yours to shape, just like Nobel shaped his. Until next time, stay curious and keep reflecting.